All right, so here we go. Rainbow, hi, Shababa MD. Great, thanks for joining us on Instagram. Today we are talking about the history of iridology. This is a really important thing for us to talk about. And I say that because if we don't know where we've come from, how do we know where we're going? And there's so much out there that is erroneous, that has been proven over time to be erroneous. And we want to make sure that as we talk about the history, that we actually get this rolling in the right direction so that we know that you're using the best information. Make sense? Does that make sense to you? I hope so. Here we go. So what we want to know is, first off, I want to know, before we dive in, I'd love to know if you have any history, any experience with iridology already. I would love to know if you have had an iris reading, or an analysis, if you have any training, and if you do, what is your training background? That would be just very cool to know. And so if you'd like to share that with me, I would be happy to hear that. You know, there are so many people that are teaching, and some of what they're teaching is good and some of it is maybe not so good. Because what we know is that science evolves, right? We know that. We know that iridology is rooted in the ancient cultures of Egypt and India and China and Greece. And Amelia, I hope I'm saying your name right, on Instagram says she has an iris reading done years ago. Shababa MD says she's got some training, but it's really basic. Okay, fabulous. Well, I'm so glad you're with me. And so we know that this is rooted in the ancient history of Egypt, India, Greece, and China. And we know that science evolves, right? We know that. We used to think the earth was flat. Now we have scientific proof that the earth is round. We used to think that that if you bled all the blood out of a person, that they would live and it would make them better. We now know that that only really works if you've got hemochromatosis, and you don't take all of it, you take just a little bit of it, right? So there are some things that we've proven over time, and that we need to understand that science evolves. And so that's part of what we're talking about today. Oh, hi, Tamara, good to see you on Instagram. So what we also need to know is that good scientists allow science to evolve, and they help it to evolve. They don't get stuck in the paradigm that they think is right? So let's get started right back here, going back to our European roots. Now, this is where we believe it all started, although that's not really true, because we've proven that it's started even back before that with the Egyptians and the Chinese and so on. Modernly, Ignaz von Petschle has been given a lot of credit for bringing iridology into the world. The story is really convoluted, though, and it's not necessarily one that makes sense. So let me relate it to you in sort of as many different ways as I've heard it. Hi, Meg. Great. Thanks for joining us on Instagram. Good to see you there. Ignaz von Petschle was an 11-year-old boy in Europe, in Budapest, Hungary. And the stories are extremely varied. They go something like this. Somehow he caught a wild bird. There's some stories say an eagle, some say a hawk, some say an owl. And somehow either the bird already had a broken leg or a broken wing, or it got broken in the process of being caught. Okay, so we've got all these variables already. This 11-year-old boy was apparently astute enough to notice that there was something different in this bird's eye, and that this black line had formed, and he watched this black line apparently disappear as he nursed this bird back to health. So there's a couple of things that we need to take into account here that are really important about this story. Number one, catching a wild bird is not an easy thing to do. Now, maybe Ignaz was very resourceful. Maybe he knew how to do this, and so maybe he did catch the bird. We also know that the structure of a bird's eye, the structure of their iris, is very different from the structure of a human iris. A human iris has layers of fiber called trabeculae that make up what we call the stroma. A bird and most animals do not have the trabeculae. They just have a flat surface that has no ability to create separations. So how he would have seen a break in the iris is anybody's best guess. A lot of people with modern research and understanding modern, the things that we do modernly about animal eyes say that what he saw could not have happened. And of course, he had no way of recording this with a camera. And so we have no actual records. So we have to sadly take the Ignaz von Petzschle story and just set it aside. Right now, I got to tell you, when I started studying iridology 4 decades ago, I heard the von Petzschle story. I believed every word of it, and I totally thought it was accurate, and was very disappointed when I learned that scientifically it's not possible. Okay, so then as we look at Ignaz von Petzschle, even August von Petzschle, who was one of Ignaz's relatives, recognized years later that Ignaz was looking at an owl's eye and not that of a human, and that he did not have the proper equipment to prove what had been recorded in stories. It's time for iridology to move forward based on sound research rather than hearsay. And that's Ellen Tart Jensen who said that specifically. So, but Ignaz, this was enough to spur him on. And that's what's exciting about this. The owl story, regardless of what happened there, what's exciting is that this made him curious. And so he actually became a medical doctor. And he started using a 2-power magnifying glass, which is not very much. It's only going to double the size of things, to look at eyes. And from there, he began to create an iridology map. That's exciting. His frustration came in that he couldn't understand why some people who had a particular kind of a marking in one area of the eye didn't have the same symptoms as other people had that same type of a marking in that same area of the eye. But now what we know, thanks to the foundation that he laid for us, is that what we see in the eye as far as structure is inherent, it's genetic. It's genetic, and so the eyes reveal to us what the inherent potentials are in the body. Hello, Outmoon Gazing. Thanks for joining us on Instagram. Then we have Pastor Neil Lilliquist and 10 Carat Flawless. It's been a while. I'm so good to see you there. We've got Pastor Neil Lilliquist. Now, he also was in Europe. All of this research is coming out of Central Europe, which is kind of exciting. And hi, V Lady. Glad you're joining us on Instagram. He correctly correlated that what we see as fiber density in an iris correlates to the resilience and the overall resistance to disease and to the constitutional strength of the person. And so when we see fibers, as we see in this image on the left, where the fiber structure is really dense, lots of fibers per square inch, this person has a body that will resist illness more efficiently than this person whose eye we see on the right, where we've got a lot of gappiness and a lot of shading. And so that was something that Pastor Neil Lilliquist figured out in his studies of iridology, that some people inherently have a stronger resilience and some people have inherently less resilience. Now, that doesn't mean the person on the left is going to be healthier and the person on the right is going to be weaker or ill all the time. It means that they need to have different awareness points. And V Lady is saying no sound. Is everybody else hearing me on Instagram? And I'm thinking they must be because they've stuck with me for like 10 or 15 minutes already. So V Lady, it might be only you. Maybe it's a speaker issue. This is being recorded. And Emilia says she can hear me, and so does Shababa MD and 10 Carat Flawless and Tamara. Yes, brilliant. So must be a problem on your end, V Lady. Okay, hopefully you can get that sorted out. So we now understand that melanin, which is a pigment, is responsible for color and pigments, and it's not the result of toxic exposure. And so when we are seeing this, hi Sarah, good to see you there on Instagram. When we see pigment in the eye, we know that that is something that can happen over time. The fiber structure is not going to change. It's going to stay the same. That's your inherent potential. The pigment is something that also has a genetic base, but it can develop over time. And so we often see this coming up with people as they get older, but we know that that pigment is not the result of toxic exposure. It's not the result of too much of a drug or a metal or anything like that. Then we have Pastor Emanuel Felke from Germany again. And so again, we're still in those 1800s into the early 1900s. He also worked with developing an iridology map. He started laying another foundation for others to build by defining constitutions, what we now call the constitutions. He also taught iridology, and the Felke Institute in Germany is actually named after him. So we need to remember too that all of these people in Europe didn't have contact with each other. There was no internet. Right? They didn't know that somebody else was doing this. Hello, Elizabeth. Good to see you on Instagram. We're glad you're here. We also in Germany have Rudolf Schnabel, and he did a lot of research into pigment and the patterning of pigment and what the different pigments mean. He was one of the very first iridologists to use a microscope to examine the iris. And now, of course, if you've got $15,000 sitting in your back pocket, you too can purchase a slit lamp microscope to do iridology with. Now, I don't have one of those. I prefer using handheld equipment that is a little less intimidating than a slit lamp microscope. Rudolf Schnabel said this: "It was no easy task, and those who believe or would like to believe that handling iridoscopy or iridology can be learned within a few weeks or even days are mistaken and do a disservice to a good cause." Sarah says, can this be saved so we can watch it later too? Yeah, it's going to be live. I believe it's on Instagram TV that it'll be sent over to as well. So you might have 24 hours to watch it. Excellent. Unless, of course, you're part of my Iridology Facebook group, Iridology Education Facebook group, in which case they will have access to this because it's being streamed to that as well. So you might want to consider that. Joseph Angerer, again, another person from Germany in the early 1900s, was a student of Schnabel's. So that's kind of cool. We're now getting a couple of generations of iridologists here. He became a naturopath, and he was concerned about the different languages used by iridologists. And we're not talking Hungarian versus German versus Russian versus Italian. We're talking about the different words that were used to describe the exact same marking. Now that's a concern because that is still a problem that plagues us as iridologists. There are so many people who are using the old language, the old words, the old descriptors, and it's difficult for those of us who are in the here and now because we're teaching the most modern stuff. He really worked to try to unify the words that were used, the language that was used. He knew that students were reading books and accepting printed word about iridology before that had been actually proven. And he refused to publish any of his work until it had been analyzed and reviewed by his professional peers. Now, this is another problem that we still have in this day and age. There are iridologists who have admitted after publishing books that their before and after pictures were doctored. Or if you look closely at the pictures, you can see that the before picture was one person and the after picture has to belong to somebody else. And so we really want to be aware of that. Shababa MD, the Facebook group is iridology.education. Actually, that's not it. It's Iridology Education for Holistic Health Practitioners. There you go. Been out of the loop for 2 months. Iridology Education for Holistic Health Practitioners is the name of the group. Then we have Joseph Deck. Joseph Deck, again in the 1900s from Germany. He was also a dedicated researcher, and it's based on a lot of his writings that Constitutional has built. And he pioneered iridology photography, and he was also an instructor. Theodor Kriege, also in the 1900s in Germany, said, "I hope that a later generation will succeed in establishing a single uniform system." We're still striving for that, to get everybody on the same page, to get everybody using the most modern iridology techniques. In spite of zealous efforts, these have so far not succeeded. Well, my goodness, we're having troubles back then. We're still having problems now. And then modernly, we had Dr. Bernard Jensen in California in the 1900s. And while he practiced the old styles of iridology, we are ever indebted to him, because he had probably the toughest job of ever. He had to, or he chose to, keep iridology alive, even though it was the archaic form, during the Cold War. When there was no more research, no more information coming out of Europe, everything was stonewalled, Bernard Jensen kept pressing forward with it. And then in 1980, Harry Wolff, who was an American-born German, got his hands on a book by Joseph Deck, and I believe by some books by Ungerer that were written in German, and he could read German, and he started studying them, and it was like, oh my goodness, this makes sense. So he started teaching constitutional iridology. And in the early 1980s, Bill Cardano joined forces with him. Bill Cardano at the time was a registered pharmacist, and he was teaching constitutional iridology with Harry Wolff. Bill Cardano went on to become a naturopath, and he was my constitutional instructor. And I'd had several other Jensenian instructors prior to that, but Bill was my constitutional instructor, and he is still a cherished, cherished colleague. In iridology in North America now, we have the Jensenian training, which a lot of people have got, and they are reluctant to move forward. They're stuck in the past, and I'm saying that with love. Remember, I was a Jensenian iridologist for 10 years. And it was the frustration with the things that I had been taught that were not proving out in my practice that made me start looking elsewhere. We have RAID, or emotional iridology, which correlates what we see in the eyes to emotional and personality traits, which is very interesting and very informative, because it helps us to understand our clients more on a deeper level. And we have constitutional iridology, which teaches us that the eyes teach us about genetic things. So again, just touching lightly on Bernard Jensen's work. Of course, he taught Jensenian iridology. He taught that the iris changes when the body changes, and that healing lines and lacuna, or lesions, as he called them, shapes, would change in shape and size as well. Traditional Jensenian iridologists have often done iris readings cold with no background information from the client. And traditional Jensenian iridologists have a very different style from modern Jensenian iridologists, because Ellen Tart Jensen, who is Bernard Jensen's daughter-in-law, she practiced with Bernard for many decades. And when he passed away, Ellen took what she had learned from him and updated it with constitutional, so that those who study with Ellen get a more constitutional approach in what they are doing. Again, RAID iridology teaches that emotional traits and personality traits are genetic, and they are revealed by markings in the irides. Readings for RAID can be done cold, and information gathered from the irides may be combined with personal and family history information for interpretation. This was founded by Denny Johnson, and he's actually really done some changing even in his research and what he teaches. And it's continued by Jim Burgess, who teaches it as behavioral iridology. When we talk about constitutional iridology originated with Joseph Deck and others. Hi, Mooney Crafts. Thanks for joining us on Instagram. We know that constitutional is now being used by medical doctors in Italy, Germany, and Russia. We know that there are correlative medical studies being done, not diagnostic, not saying this marker means that disease, but more along the lines of saying this marker teaches and that there is a potential risk for a problem in this area. And then they're doing the longitudinal research that backtracks and follows people over many years to see what develops physically and what was that person actually doing for their health. Constitutional teaches that eyes are a reflection of the genetic structure of the body. and it is the foundation of what I teach as dynamic iridology. It is so important, and I just so appreciate what Bill Cardona taught me in my very first iridology lesson with him. And that was, iridology does not give us answers. It teaches us what questions to ask. And that is beautiful because it makes the iris reading a very holistic reading where we're involving our client. Other iris and sclera changes may continue to become visible with time, and we're talking primarily about pigment in the iris and about blood vessels in the sclera. And those reveal areas that may need support on an ongoing basis. Hi, Mom's Herbs, good to see you. Background information is very important when we're doing a constitutional analysis, and so we want to make sure that we never do it cold. Shababa, isn't that a great quote? It does not give us the answers, it teaches us what questions to ask. So when I started learning iridology in 1979, I learned the Jensenian stuff. Constitutional iridology had not yet really reached Canada, and it was not widespread in the US because Harry and Bill were just starting their journey with this. I studied and embraced everything that was available from Bernard Jensen at the time. My teacher, actually 3 of my teachers, were first generation Jensenian iridologists. So I was getting it pretty close to from Jensen's mouth himself. But again, about 10 years into that, I was frustrated. I'd been told I would see eyes change. I'd been told, hi, Marion, good to see you. I was told that we would see things happening, and I would put my clients on cleanses and special diets and lifestyle programs, and their eyes wouldn't change. So I was getting frustrated. I'd see an eye like this, and I'd be taught that every one of these was a lesion in the Jensenian language, and every one of these was a pathological problem that was happening right now. And 90% of the time, my clients denied having problems in those areas. And so we were also told that if there were lines inside that, it meant that healing was happening. Well, we didn't have before and after pictures to see if there'd been no lines in there to begin with, and if the lines had started forming or anything like that, because most of us didn't have cameras yet at that point in time. We were taught that when the pigment is uneven, like it is in this eye, that it meant this body was full of toxins and that they would need to be cleansed out, and that if we did the right cleanses, these eyes would turn blue. I can't tell you how many people I put through intense cleanses, like, oh my goodness, intense cleanses, and we did not see their eyes change. This is after I finally got a camera. We saw no changes. The teachers who taught me before had before and after pictures, and they looked convincing. Lesions did look smaller, the eyes did look bluer, but I didn't know anything about photography back then. And so I was getting more and more frustrated because I wasn't getting the results that they said I should be getting. Then I learned about constitutional iridology and decided to give it a chance because I was literally ready to shut the door on iridology and walk away. My ego couldn't take being wrong 90% of the time. My clients weren't getting the results that I wanted them to get based on their eyes. They were feeling better, but we all wanted the eyes to change. And if the eyes didn't change, it made me a liar. And I wasn't willing to stay there. So I originally bought VHS videotapes, did I just date myself, from Harry Wolff. And I studied those and studied those and studied those. And then I had brought Bill Cardona to Canada to teach classes here. And that was where that training, the videotapes and Bill's teachings, are how I learned about the inherent predispositions. And, you know, it's what we now know is that the eyes show us 3 to 4 generations of inherent stuff. So when we look at this, we are looking back to what the parents gave, what the grandparents gave, and what the great-grandparents gave. We also know now that pigments are not an accumulation of toxins in the eyes, but they show us, based on the pigment color and the pigment placement, which organs might be struggling. That's why we sometimes see pigments come up, because there might be a genetic programming for that organ to start struggling or to have a problem. It might be breaking down, might be genetically programmed, the pigment pops up, and then we understand that we need to support those areas. Constitutional iridologists Iridology teaches us to look for patterns and to understand the relationships and the interrelationships of organs. And what that means is I can look at an eye like the one you're seeing on your screen, and I know what organs these are sitting in, and I know what all of this means, but I have to ask the client, what are their symptoms and what are they doing for their health? Because this client may not have symptoms in those areas, because they may be doing the right things to support their body in those areas. Doing the right things doesn't change this client's genetic structure, but it changes how their body behaves. Does that make sense? That iridology teaches us what questions to ask. It shows us where the weak links are. Then we need to have that conversation with the client to understand what they're doing that maybe helping things work better, or maybe helping things not work so well. So this means that we just need to always be aware of asking those questions. And this is such a huge step forward from the Jensenian training I had, where I would tell my clients, hi, Almas, good to see you. Where I would tell my clients, an actual, you've got a problem here, 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 here. By the time they were done, it was like, oh my goodness, I should just give them a business card for my friends who own a funeral home, because they were discouraged. I was discouraged, and I was going about this all wrong, but it's how I've been taught to do it with Jensenian. Constitutional iridology teaches us to look at the eye in the context of the owner. This is the eye of an Asian woman in her mid-30s. When she came to me, her concern was infertility. The fertility clinic had been unable to help her. The one key thing I noted here was the contraction furrows. And when I added that to other indicators that I saw in her eye, I suspected she might have a problem methylating her B vitamins. And if you know anything about the B vitamins, if they're not methylated properly in the liver, then there's going to be problems with the hormones. So I also suspected that her liver, even though she was only in her 30s, might be having problems processing carbohydrates properly. So what we did is that first thing when I saw those things, I asked her, has the doctor ever given you a diagnosis of any sort? And she thought about it. She said, oh yeah, they said I have type 2 diabetes, totally atypical, petite, not overweight, hair was fine, no facial hair, totally atypical for type 2 diabetes in a woman. And then when we looked at her menstrual history, it was easy to see that she not only had type 2 diabetes, but she had its companion problem of polycystic ovarian syndrome. I couldn't diagnose that because I'm not a medical doctor, but when we looked at how far apart her cycles were and when she was ovulating and how short her luteal phase was, we knew right then and there that it had to be PCOS caused by type 2 diabetes. So we were able to actually reconstruct her diet, and she was on board, gave her the supplements to help her with the methylation, to help her with the liver, to help her with all kinds of things. It took us about 18 months of working together, and then she got pregnant and delivered a very healthy baby boy. And we were so excited. Hello, Elk Women. Good to see you on Instagram. We were so excited. If I had not had the understanding of constitutional iridology that I do, I would never have thought to have gone that direction with her, because these eyes say so much, but I had to choose which markings to integrate, and how I had to understand how the markings play together to understand what her body is inherently capable of. So again, it was the eyes that took me where I needed to go, and I couldn't have done that with any other style of iridology except for constitutional. So what do I think the future of iridology is? Well, as long as there is good research going on, and as long as iridology instructors and students are willing to keep pace with the research and to continue to come forward into the here and the now rather than staying back 40 or 50 or 60 years, I think what we will see is iridology will become a recognized assessment tool. Notice I didn't say diagnostic, but an assessment tool. And I think that we will also see that it will become very much appreciated in many different health fields. If we as a community of iridology practitioners and iridology users and iridology students persist in hanging on to the old methods that have been disproved, then and that are outdated, that are not accurate, and if those ineffective teachings of the past continue, iridology will continue to come under fire as being quackery. And we need, if we want to be taken seriously, the choice is ours to get current and stay current and promote what is current. And if we don't, we're going to cripple iridology. Iridology's come so far. Let's keep it moving forward by updating our skills and by keeping up with everything that is good research that is coming out. Let's avoid the sales hype of take this supplement, turn those brown eyes blue, and let's simply work with the best. In a future live, maybe in the next one, we'll talk about before and after photos. And I'll show you how a photo can be very easily doctored, or how photos that are not using the same equipment can really be a mess. They can just really create a problem. So with that, my friends, thank you for joining me today. I have loved being back with you. And you know what? We're going to do this more often, like once or twice a week. We will talk to you later again. Thanks so much for being here. Have a great day. Bye for now.